Thank you, Victoria, and thanks for having me here today. Good morning, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. Like Victoria mentioned, I will have a different perspective for sure. This is a different crowd than what I'm used to. I usually talk about tires and trailers, but I'll do my best to keep you interested. Before I start, if you would give me a few minutes, I got up this morning, and like most of you, I got on Facebook and I browsed irrelevant and useless information about people I barely know. But it just so happened that I landed on a story from a really good friend of mine in Moncton. And I read it, and I thought that, wow, this is really fitting. So I called him. I said, do you mind if I use your story? He said, I'd be honored. So I'm going to share it with you because we're in a place where this story might be interesting for all of you. So 50 years ago today, on November 30th, 1966, my mom, who was pregnant with me at the time, and dad arrived in Canada for the first time. Their point of entry was Montreal, and after they went through immigration, they flew to St. John, New Brunswick, where they spent the next several decades raising a family. I've thought many times how difficult and scary it must have been for them to move to a new country without any money and not be able to speak English. What courage it must have taken. I called Mom tonight to say a happy anniversary, and she said she had been thinking about it all day. I told her I wish I could speak to Dad today and tell him thank you for immigrating to Canada. It was a very good decision. She said, me too. I'm very grateful for the people of St. John for the way they welcomed my parents and all the other Roca families. I'm honestly grateful that Mom and Dad took the road less traveled and came to Canada because we're all better for it. That's it. So I'm sure there's more stories like that around the country, but I thought this was pretty fitting, so glad you enjoyed it. All right, so trucking. Well, we are a large industry in Canada, $20 billion in GDP. So it's more than the rail and air combined. So, and we're very, very human-based industry. Therefore, we need a lot of people. And sadly enough, we're not a very attractive industry for a lot of Canadians. We employ about 200 truck drivers across Canada, and that's our number one position, obviously, to move the freight. So immigrants make up about 20% of that, which is significantly high in my eyes, and I think it's higher in Atlantic Canada. Just a few stats, 97% of truck drivers are male, and for the last 10 years, you might have read a story in the paper, on TV, that we are in a tremendous need of truck drivers and other laborers across our industry. It is very well documented, and it's been a huge, huge challenge for most companies, to even extent that people have to refuse business because they can't find drivers to drive their trucks. So the current situation, like my colleagues here mentioned, we're getting older, and we're no different. The average age of a driver is 50 years old. So for me, when I see that, and I see the industry as a key component to the economy in Canada, that's very alarming to me. The Conference Board of Canada did a survey, a research for us, and this year, and by 2025, we're going to need about 33,000 drivers, and that was conservative. If we can't find drivers, we can't move the freight. So if you go to Starbucks in the morning and you don't have your coffee, most of you are going to be cranky. I mean, it's something that's beginning to be alarming for our industry. That's why we're paying more and more attention to it. And I'll explain a little bit later why the provincial government in Atlantic Canada is paying more attention to it also. But it doesn't just include drivers. It includes mechanics, dispatchers, executives, logistics experts. It's an industry that's traditionally very difficult to recruit people. And our target market for the next years will be younger generations, women, and obviously immigrants. And what we've done to recruit, we've done everything. We've launched campaigns, we're on social media, we talk to high school, we talk to students, but it's not enough. So what we've realized is that immigration is going to be a real part of our strategy here to recruit some good people to work in trucking. It is today, but it's going to have to be even more exponentially a strategy to involve more immigration into our programs and into our industry. So traditionally, we tapped into the temporary foreign worker program. And like you talked about, it's been a good program for us, although I think we haven't used it well. It became the only strategy for some companies, and they found themselves with 60–70% of their work pool as temporary foreign workers, which is not necessarily a good formula, because we know if, we're not sure if they're going to stay, if they're going to go. So for a company, I'd be very scary to have 60% of my workforce as temporary foreign workers. So a few years ago, when the changes were made by the federal government, it had a huge impact on our industry, especially in Atlantic Canada, where I'd say 50–75% of carriers employed temporary foreign workers. So when the caps were put in, the LMIA applications went up to $1,000, and the English test, I don't know if it changed, but it seemed like everybody had more difficulty with the English test. It created chaos. My phone was ringing off the hook. So we met on different occasions with the federal government to explain our situation and how these changes were impacting us so negatively that we needed other options to keep these immigrants here and recruit some more. And all these things came afloat, and I think they listened because, recently there's some new programs coming in Atlantic Canada, and I don't know if it's because we made a lot of noise, but I'm sure that it had something to do with it. Now, obviously immigration comes with challenges for our industry. And these are quotes from some of our members, from some of our carriers. There's too many steps, nomination to permanent residency. The renewal process for work permits is too long and difficult. Application process is too long for our industry that has a proven work shortage. Too much paperwork. English tests very difficult. The wait period is too long to get the families here. So even though they were faced with all these challenges, they still employed a huge amount of immigrants. So can you imagine if this was streamlined very smoothly and the process was more efficient, easier? I mean, I think we'd have more opportunities to bring more immigrants to the trucking industry for sure. So hopefully some of the governments, the provincial governments and the federal government will throw some of those books out and look at the process from scratch, because the process 50 years ago is not necessarily good for what's going on today. So our labor shortage, like I said, it's very well documented. And as I mentioned, we spoke, we met with different governments, and I think the provincial government are starting to listen, especially in Atlantic Canada. So there's been some recent federal immigration policy changes that's going to give us an opportunity to tap into other immigration programs aside from temporary foreign workers, and particularly for low and semi-skilled trade, which falls under the truck drivers specifically job. So we're very, very pleased to hear that. Obviously, just to give you an example, I sent out an email to maybe 15 companies, trucking companies last week, telling them that there's going to be some changes like this, and they all called me and said, we're interested. Where do we sign up? So we anticipate being more heavily reliant on provincially managed immigration programs such as provincial nominee program, as these tend to be more responsive to regional labor supply needs. That is a huge news for us. As I mentioned, we're going to be looking for 33,000 drivers. So you can imagine that when they're going to tie into the immigration programs to the labor needs, this is right up our alley. The New Brunswick Provincial Nominee Program, for example, administers several immigration streams that can be leveraged to help alleviate industry shortages, namely skilled worker with employer support stream in the short and long term. So, as I think the lady over there mentioned, that there's a pilot program that's going to be launched in Atlantic Canada in 2017. And this is going to have, we'll be very engaged in this as they're going to engage more employers to work with the provincial government to find out the needs, to make sure that those jobs are filled with qualified immigrants. And I think the quota of immigrants is going to be up to bit in New Brunswick as well. So we're really excited that this is happening, because finally, I think they heard that the labor shortages, It's not because we don't want to hire locally, it's just that we can't. And we can't fill all the jobs that are open. I mean, if you open any trucking magazine today, I guarantee you on every 2 pages you'll have a carrier now looking for a driver. And that is a scary thought. So when you can't hire locally, well, I mean, you got to look elsewhere. And immigration has been very beneficial to us, to our industry, in the past 25 years. And we hope that it's going to be even more beneficial in years to come. And we're very looking forward to those programs, changes coming. So again, looking ahead, we need to create more awareness for immigration, for immigrants, to make sure that they know what they're getting into. We don't want them to come here and drive a truck for a week and then, this is not what I wanted, this is not what I expected. So there needs to be some sort of education with them before they come in, and develop some industry-wide recruiting campaigns, not sporadic individual moves to bring in some immigrants. I think that there should be some industry campaigns, such as our association, to get more involved, to make sure that it's a well-structured campaign to bring in some immigrants to fill those job needs, and to close those gaps between carriers and immigrants looking for work. And lastly, truck driver needs to be recognized as a skilled trade. I think it would alleviate a lot of our issues. Thank you.